Today, we are honored to have reading and writing experts who will discuss ways in addressing these challenges. Our first speaker is a principal lecturer at the English Language and Literature Department at the National Institute of Education in Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Prior to his current position, he taught at Simya Singapore, where he also served as head of the Department of Language Education and Research. He holds an MA TESOL and Ph.D. in Educational Psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the USA. He has taught in many parts of Asia, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, and is a frequent speaker at language conferences in the Asian region. His teaching and research interests include second and foreign language pedagogy, extensive reading, language testing, and curriculum development. He has published research articles in various journals, authored ESL textbook, and edited numerous books and anthologies. Everyone, let us all welcome Dr. Willy Renandya.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sorry, it took me a while to share my slides. I am so excited to be here. I think Joey mentioned about the places that I have visited and given presentation, and one of my favorite places is Thailand, the country of 1,000 or 1 million now. It's a country of 1 million smiles. Today's presentation or today's topic is really interesting, and I think you can relate to the topic really well. It's essentially the focus will be on how we can make the connection between reading and writing more clearly and more directly as well. So that when we teach reading, we can also highlight to our students some of the important features that they have seen or they are seeing in their reading for later use when they start writing their own essays. Today, I will first start off by looking at reading. What is reading? Why it is important? And how reading is usually taught in the language classroom. So the first part will be on reading. I think it's very important for us to understand what reading is all about. And then afterwards, Ajahn Supong will talk about writing. And then together, we'll try to speculate, we'll try to suggest ways in which reading and writing can be connected, more closely together. My slides are available in my website. It's called Willy's ELT Corner, and that is the address, willyrenandya.com. And I've also included my QR code there for you to scan. And later you can visit and download the slides. Okay, again, the very brief presentation is basically about three major points. Number one, what is reading? And number two, why is it important? And how is reading usually taught? Let me begin with the first one. What is reading? I'm not going to make it very theoretical, but I'm going to focus on four. There are many other processes, but these are the four major processes that I think are important, that I think deserve our attention as a reading teacher in the second language classroom. Reading is a linguistic process. It is also a thinking process, a cognitive process. It is also an affective process. And finally, it is also a social process. I'm going to walk you through one of these processes one at a time. When you say reading is a linguistic process, basically what I mean is that you need a lot of language knowledge in order for you to be able to understand what the text says. Let me say that again. Here, reading as a linguistic process means that students or we need a lot of language knowledge in order for us to be able to get at the basic superficial meaning of the text. In other words, our main concern here is to understand what the text actually says. So what are some of the linguistic knowledge that you need? Well, essentially you need words. You need a lot of words in order for you to be able to make sense of the text. But words alone are not enough. You also need to understand how the words create new meanings when they're put together in a phrase, in a sentence, in a clause, or even in the whole paragraph. You also need to understand the many text features that are present to help you to see the link between the sentences, between the different parts of the text. So this is essentially the basic linguistic processes that are involved in reading. Without knowledge of language, it is going to be difficult for you to understand what the text says in the first place. So from the reader's point of view, the job of the reader is that of a text decoder. Text decoder means you need to be able to use language to make sense of the text. That's the first one. Is that enough? I don't think that's enough. I think you also need to understand that reading is also a thinking process. It's a cognitive process. Essentially, when you read, you want to know what the text says, but you also want to know what the text actually means, because the author is not always telling you the meaning that he tries or they try to convey in the text. This is where you will need to make a lot of connections. You will need to make use of what you know, your prior knowledge, in order to make sense of what is presented in the text. So in that sense, it's a thinking process. You also need to make a lot of inferences. The text provides meaning, explicit meaning, but also implicit meaning. You can't really get at the implicit meaning without the ability to make inferences. And inferencing is a thinking skill. Another important point here is the idea that when you read, you do not always understand everything that is presented in the text. And because of that, you ask questions to help you understand. Sometimes you also question the text and question the author. Why is the author saying this in the first paragraph, but not in the second paragraph? Why is the author, for example, why does the author use certain words, but not other words? What is it that the author is trying to say to us? In other words, we are concerned with what the text actually means. Evaluating is another important thinking process. When we read, we also do a lot of this. You try to assess the value of the information presented in the text. Sometimes you agree with the author and sometimes you disagree. And later on, you decide on, some of the information that you agree with, that you keep in your mind. So here is what I mean by what the text means. You need to do a lot of thinking. So from the reader's point of view, they need to be able to serve as a text comprehender and also as a text critic. A text critic is somebody who is able to tell whether the content of the reading passage is biased, is slanted toward a certain world views that you may or may not agree with. So again, reading is a thinking process. Number 3, reading is also an affective process. It's about what the text feels like to you as a reader. What is it about the text that makes you feel in a certain way? What is it about the text that makes you change your views about how the world operates in certain ways? So in other words, reading also involves a lot of emotional connection. Whether you like the main character, whether you hate the main character, whether you develop a certain affinity with some of the ideas or the people mentioned in the story. So essentially, this process is very important because eventually, when you read something, you want to make that personal connection to the text, what the text means to you personally as a reader. Another important dimension is this, the affective dimension. If you really like the topic of the reading passage or of the book, then chances are you will develop a more positive attitude towards reading, and eventually you may be able to develop a good, healthy habit of reading, which is extremely important. The last one, very often ignored in the language classroom, is this, that reading is also a social process. What does it mean? I think we understand this idea that meaning, linguistic meaning, or whatever kind of meaning is socially constructed. Words become meaningful because the meaning has undergone a lot of social construction, a lot of social dimensions will have to be taken into account when you try to understand what a word or what a text is all about. The notion, for example, a simple word like husband, the word husband means different things to different people from different cultures. In the same way, children also mean different things to different people from different cultures. Unless you understand the social meaning of words or ideas, then chances are your understanding of the text may not be complete. In the classroom, reading can also be done in group, because reading in group can provide that important social support especially for the struggling readers. With the help of their peers, students may be able to make better sense, to have a better understanding of the text. And because of that, their ability to make sense of the text becomes more enriched, and they are able to understand the text in a more widely and also in a more comprehensive manner. Now, this is the idea behind building a community of readers. Okay, so those are the 4 processes that I think are important for us to take into account when we look at reading from a pedagogical perspective. The first one is that reading is a linguistic process. Number 2, reading is a thinking process. Number 3, reading is an emotional process. And finally, reading is a social process. Let me now move on to discussing why reading is important. What is it about reading that is so special? I have a few ideas to share with you. The academic benefits of reading are obvious. Now, here are some of the benefits that you and I have seen a lot in our life, either as a teacher or just as an individual. Reading is a source of information and knowledge. Yes, we hear people talk, we listen to presentations done orally on YouTube and on other social media, but you would agree with me that most of the information and knowledge that we gain comes from reading books. Number 2, from a language learning perspective, reading is one of the most important sources of language nutrition. This simply means that in order for you to learn a language, you need a lot of language input, and reading is one such input that you will need in order for you to grow linguistically, in order for you to develop proficiency in the language. So reading is a main source of language input. I think if you look at the literature, you can also see that reading is also a strong predictor of second language proficiency. What it means is that students who read a great deal tends to do well, tend to develop a higher level of language proficiency in the target language. And finally, most importantly, reading improves your writing skills. I think this is one topic that we will elaborate a bit further in the later part of today's session. Reading and writing connections. Other benefits, these are more like social and personal benefits. You become self-smart. I mean, if you read a lot, I think you will be able to learn a lot of things from the experience of other people, and that help you to reflect on your own individuals, on your own persons. And because of that, you'll be able to understand yourself better. It improves your social skills as well. I think, you know, the knowledge that you gain can be a very good basis for you to talk to people, to interact with people, using the information that you have gained from your reading. The last one is also very interesting. People who read tend to be happier as well, and they complain less. I know some teachers complain a lot, but teachers who read usually are happier and they don't complain as much. I complain too, but I don't complain a lot these days. And finally, if you read a lot, it's a blessing to other people and to your students as well. People or teachers who read a lot have a lot more interesting things to share with their students. And because of that, they can be seen as a blessing for other people, for your students, for people in your workplace, and so on. Okay, so I've looked at what reading is. Number two, why reading is important. And finally, how reading is taught. Now, this one is very straightforward. Essentially, in second language pedagogy or in second language reading pedagogy, there are two major approaches to teaching reading. The first one is known as intensive reading. This is the kind of reading that we usually do in the classroom. In one lesson, you have one reading passage, and usually what you want the students to do is to be able to have a detailed understanding of the text. And typically in intensive reading, the amount of reading is very limited, just one reading passage, maybe in one lesson. So for the whole year, the students may, be exposed to not more than, 30 reading passages. That's way too little. Another important thing in an intensive reading approach is that the reading passage is usually difficult. It's higher than the students' current level. Very difficult, very challenging, and the students usually need to read very slowly, and they need to read one word at a time, which is known as a word-by-word reading. And in a typical intensive reading lesson, usually the teachers ask a lot of reading comprehension questions at the end, before the lesson ends. This approach can be contrasted to another approach known as extensive reading. So you can see here, when I put them side by side, you'll be able to see some of the major differences between the two. In extensive reading, the aim is to develop general understanding of the text. Another important point is that the students need to read a great deal. They need to read a lot. And the text is usually easy at their level, or sometimes below their level. Now, the kind of reading that is done in the extensive reading is what has been called idea reading. You read words in groups, not one by one. And that is what people like you and me usually read, the newspaper. It's, phrasal reading. It's, a group reading or idea reading, if you like. And the activities, the main activities in extensive reading lesson usually is, there's a lot of interesting and enjoyable reading activities. And the main goal basically is to develop fluency in reading. So two major approaches to teaching reading. Here are some additional benefits of extensive reading. Just two things to remember. When you focus more on extensive reading, this is what you will be able to help your students to gain. Number one, the students will be able to gain a lot of world knowledge. I think this is very important. Students who know more, or people who know more, will find it easier to read a wider variety of texts. Remember our discussion early on about reading is a thinking process. In order for you to be able to make sense of the text, you will need to have a lot of prior knowledge and make use of that prior knowledge for you to be able to, or to make sense of the text. The other important benefit is word knowledge. So this come together, world knowledge and also word knowledge. The word knowledge here goes back to our discussion early on about the fact that reading is a linguistic process. You need a lot of words, you need a lot of linguistic knowledge in order for you to be able to read well in whatever language, whether it's English or your first language. Yeah, two major benefits. Now here is a very, very simple definition of reading. Reading is a process of bringing meaning into a text in order to get meaning from it. Now this shows the interactive nature of reading, and this is related to our earlier discussion about the first two processes, that reading is a linguistic process, but it is also a thinking process. Let me end my presentation with this very important quote about extensive reading. Extensive reading is an excellent approach to teaching reading and also to teaching language, if you like, but it is severely underutilized, and in many other places, it is often ignored. Okay, one more time. Again, I have looked at three major areas of reading. Number one, what is reading? Number two, why is it important? And number three, how to go about teaching reading. I will now like to call upon my co-presenter, Professor Ajahn Supong, to continue with the discussion on writing. So remember, first part is reading, the second part is writing, and then together we will talk about the way to link the two together so that what we have eventually is a good reader in our students and also a good writer. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ajahn Supong Tangkiengsirisin.
Oh, thank you so much, Ajahn Willy, for the wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is an associate professor in applied linguistics and is currently the director of the Language Institute of Thammasat University. He holds an MA in English from Chulalongkorn University and his PhD in English Studies from the University of Nottingham in the UK. He has extensively published in various peer-reviewed and indexed academic journals in the areas of English, written discourse, writing strategies, English for specific purposes, genre analysis, and second language writing instruction and research. He also specializes in teacher training in Thai contexts with a focus on English teachers' language skills and professional development for primary and secondary education. Our speaker today is currently the president of Thailand TESOL. Once again, please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Supong Tangkiengsirisin.
Okay, thank you very much, Joey, right, and Dr. Willy Renandya, for introducing me, okay, briefly. And I need to say many thanks, to Dr. Pornpimon, right, the director of EIL, Chulalongkorn University, for inviting me, okay, to speak today. And it's my honor, to have an opportunity, to speak, speak, with Dr. Willy Renandya, okay, our distinguished speaker today. And as you know, right, our main topic today is, the connection between reading and writing. And so Ajahn Willy, right, has talked about reading. So now I'm going to talk about writing. So what is writing? Okay, so writing is not just speech written down, okay, because, writing and speech, follow different conventions. Okay, so writing is something different from speech for sure. And so writing is a productive skill, like speech, as you know. Okay, we have productive skill and receptive skill, right? But writing is a productive skill. And writing is, of course, a complex activity because, when we write, we need to follow several stages, to go through, all right? And we need to know about, the writing conventions. We need to have linguistic knowledge. We need to have enough grammatical competence. We need to have vocabulary, and we need to use certain thinking strategies, okay, that we need, right, to express ourselves proficiently. So this is something that, our students need to develop as well. And so writing is a recursive process. So, recur, right? So that means, we cannot just write, in a linear way. It's not like the start. We start from the start, from the beginning, and then, we move on to the end, just in a linear manner. But, we need to go back and forth during the stages of writing. So that means, for example, after we finish planning and outlining what we want to write, as we craft the first draft, we may have to go back to the outline to revise it. Okay, or when we revise our draft, we have to go back to the first draft, of course, and maybe we have to find more information. Okay, so that we can revise the first draft more effectively. So this is some brief information about the difference between sorry. This is the brief information about the differences between writing and speech. Okay, so as you know, right, writing is more monologic than speech, which is more dialogic. And writing is the basic unit of writing is the clause. Okay, while for speech, okay, the utterance or turn acts as a building stone. Writing is more planned, okay, but speech is more spontaneous. Writing tends to follow certain standard, okay, and socially accepted forms, but speech, is more open to different accents. Writing is likely, to be displaced in time and space. That means, free from context, but speech tends to be face-to-face. And writing is visual and relies more on shape and structure, but speech is oral. Okay, just, mainly for hearing or listening. So this information, right, is mainly from, Mully and Stockwell, 2010 and 2015. Okay, the classical textbook, on introducing the English language. So now I want to talk about why is writing skill important. Okay, it's an important skill, of course, because, it's mainly used for communication, right? And so it's very important, for the second language learning process. And writing, can also be of great importance, to academic success because, it is the most common assessment measure, okay, for academics to evaluate their students. And so maybe students' weak writing ability may put their academic success considerably at risk. So that's why, we need to train our students, to write effectively. This is not just for their academic life, in our schools or university, but, this is important, for their future life, for their work. So when we talk about writing as a task, from students' point of view, okay, students usually see writing as a difficult task. They have to struggle, with writing a lot to pass the exams or to pass their thesis defenses. Okay, this is particular, for MA or PhD students here. Okay, and because of the active and productive nature of writing. So writing in a foreign language or in English is a big challenge for students then, because they have to try to accomplish, okay, their writing, through accurate and coherent expression of ideas in written form, but then in a foreign language which they are not familiar with. And also usually students do not want to write, okay, because they have never been encouraged to write, or they have never been encouraged, to enjoy writing. So this is, one of the biggest challenges teachers have faced in the classroom. Okay, but it's worth remembering that, most people never write anything of any length in their daily lives. But, in our classroom, all right, we usually ask or assign our students, to write in English. So it's usually something very demanding for our students. And so writing, like all other aspects of language, is communicative. In real life, we may write different kinds of writing. You see, like emails, notes, letters, reports, assignments, essays, thesis. Okay, and so, we also write maybe articles or work on blogs, forums, websites, and we also, write on social media. So all of these writing tasks, have a communicative purpose and a target audience. But usually in the English language classroom, writing lacks that communicative purpose. So you will have to think about, you know, how we can help our learners learn to write, okay, more communicatively and maybe with pleasure. So what can we do then, you know, to help our students retain their interest in writing while they develop skills and confidence? So students need a basic foundation and understanding of English to be able to write. For example, you know, they will need to know how to identify and talk about objects and people in English to write something about them, right? And so, you know, age plays an important role in what we teach and how we teach it. For example, you know, a young learner class is different from an adult or teenager class in terms of the learner's needs, the language competencies emphasized, and also the cognitive skills developed. Okay, so you need to know your students quite well. You need to know how old they are, how ready they are, you know, for developing their writing skill. So now let's move on, you know, to the topic of characteristic of writing. Similar to reading, okay, writing is a cognitive activity and writing is also an emotional activity. So writing as a cognitive activity, for this point, right, students, you know, should try to acquire their skills and knowledge in helpful writing strategies, okay, to help them craft their writing more effectively. And so for writing as an emotional activity, so all aspects of the writing process are affected by its affective factors. Affective here is the word, you know, with the A, not the E, right? Affective. So learners' beliefs about their writing abilities and their apprehension level about academic writing, their attitudes towards writing are significant indexes of academic writing performance in EFL students. And so high motivation of students leads to high level of confidence as well. And also enjoyment, perceived ability, positive attitude towards efficient teaching methods of writing. So students, you know, should be able to draw on writing strategies as effectively as they can. Now, when we talk about writing studies, or, you know, when we do some research on writing, what are some categories, you know, of the studies? So the first kind of study is process of writing. This kind of study, you know, mainly deals with analysis of composing strategies, modeling cognitive operations, and individual differences. While the product of writing mainly involves error analysis or contrastive analysis, contrastive rhetoric, and text analysis. Another kind of writing study is the context of writing, which typically investigates social construction and the analysis of the individual knowledge, needs, and motivation. And the last type of writing studies, you know, is the teaching of writing, which mainly investigates learning strategies, learning processes, classroom procedures, development of language proficiency, and assessment. So if you're interested in writing studies or doing research in writing, maybe you can pay attention, you know, to some of these categories. So let me give you some information, right, about, you know, the approaches to the teaching and researching of writing. So there are three major approaches, you know, to the teaching and researching of writing. So the product-oriented approach deals with the final product and its evaluation. It's kind of old approach now, all right? And the process-oriented approach deals with the way through which the finished product is reached. This is also quite old. So now, right, you know, we tend, you know, to employ, you know, the post-process approach, okay, which pays more attention to social dimensions of the writing field and dramatically increase popularity of collaborative writing. And so the studies of the written product then so far have focused on, all right, language and linguistic structures, you know, in student writing, something like syntactic complexity or T-unit. And they also study the general characteristics, okay, like communicative effectiveness, or other traits, okay, proposed by the rhetorical theories. And they also investigate the syntactic length, as a measure of writing proficiency. And they also look at the sentences, okay, which need to be related to each other in writing. So this is what we usually refer to as, cohesion and coherence in writing. In the writing process, then, the three elements which interact with each other to produce a composition, this is the main focus, right, of the process approach, okay? So the first one is the task environment, which consists of everything outside the writer, such as the audience or the written text itself. And the second one is the writer's knowledge of the topic, of the writer's knowledge of writing rhetorical problems, plans, genre, and conventions. So this is the knowledge that the writer has to have about writing. And the third one, the last one, the writing processes, okay, that are the major thinking processes that writers employ in complicated ways during their writing. So when we do research, in the writing process, these are the three main elements that we will look at. And so the process approach theory has three phases. Normally, when we teach writing, using the process, okay, we focus on planning, composing, and reviewing. So you may already have known that planning, right, usually means, producing content, organizing the content, determining goals and procedures for writing. And so as the writer requires a form of mental activity, planning acts as a thinking activity. And the next stage or the next phase is composing, which is usually an expression of the content of planning in the composition. So the writer is attempting to produce and develop his or her idea in a meaningful way. And the last phase is reviewing, which refers to the evaluation of what has been written and planned. And so sometimes, because of the unsatisfactory result of this evaluation, the writer needs to revise his or her composition. But after the year 2000, the post-process approach, which is an original process inquiry into more social issues, has emerged in the L2 writing context. So in the post-process approach, okay, we seek to highlight the rich multifocal nature of the writing field, and we also go beyond the traditional views of L2 writing, research, and teaching. And so this approach puts in more social aspects to writers and ignores cognitive science to exceed prevalent perspectives in L2 writing studies and teaching. This is from Fujita 2006. And so the post-process approach considers writing as a collaborative and social act rather than a certain technique that can be codified and taught to individual learners. And written texts need to be viewed as products of a complicated web of social interactions, cultural practices, discursive conventions, and power differentials. So we don't just look at the process or the product. So during the post-process era, then the post-process approach then seems to be an integrated approach to the teaching of writing through combining the strength of the genre and process approaches for utilization in writing courses. And now also, we are in the post-pedagogy era. That means, now we are in the post-methods era. That means no particular method, is the best method of teaching. And so here, right, we are also very concerned, with the technologies. Okay, so we use a lot of technology in our teaching. So this is what we also do, okay, when we teach writing. So I'm just showing here some examples, right, of the technologies we can use in teaching writing. okay, the website and the online tools that you can locate quite easily, okay, online. All right, these are just some examples, and there are the specific types of websites or tools that you can find, okay, to help your student develop their writing skill. So now let me share with you some information about the two approaches, okay, to writing. The first one, this is the information focused approach, and this is being compared, right, to the knowledge transformation approach. And from here we can see the differences in the thinking processes as a student writes. So the first one, information focused approach. So this approach is normally used by novice writers. Okay, so if your students are novice writers, then they tend to follow this approach. So that means, during the planning process, they just try to find out what they know about a topic. Okay, they just need to think about what they should include in their writing, where they can find more information. And during the organizing stage, okay, students tend to present the information in a chronological order, not in a logical order. They just simply think about what happens first and what happens next, what happens later. And during the writing or revising stage, okay, novice writers tend to be preoccupied with the micro levels of writing issues. That means, they are usually concerned about mistakes in grammar and spelling. So they tend to use simple vocabulary and sentence structure just to avoid making errors in their writing. But then on the other hand, the knowledge transformation approach is often used by more experienced writers. Okay, so this refers to maybe high proficiency students or ourselves, as writers. So during the planning stage, okay, experienced writers tend to be more concerned about rhetorical situation. That means they try to determine the purpose of writing. They try to think about the audience of their writing, the context. So they think carefully about what information and rhetorical moves will best fit the rhetorical situation. And then during the organizing stage, experienced writers tend to consider how different organization of information helps them fulfill their rhetorical goals. So they make sure that the organizational structure satisfies the rhetorical situation. And they also anticipate their readers' expectations and reactions. And during the writing and revising stage, they focus more on the macro rhetorical goal. And so this is a strategic level that the experienced writer use as they anticipate the reader's expectations and possible agreement or disagreement. So we can see that novice writers and experienced writers follow different thinking processes, as they write. Now, another important issue in writing is feedback. So as you know, feedback, okay, is an important and essential issue in writing development. So we can help our students develop their writing mainly through different kinds of feedback. So one definition of feedback is that, feedback is input from a reader to a writer with the effect of providing information to the writer for revision. Okay, this is quite easy to understand what feedback means. And so there are three major types of feedback which are normally used, okay, in writing courses. The first one is peer feedback, which mainly involves using the question provided by the teacher to examine their peers' written work and give feedback to each other. The second one, conferences as feedback. There are two types, of conferences as feedback. So the first one is student-teacher conference, student-teacher conference, which means, right, the teacher and the student, will meet on a face-to-face basis. And the teachers then will be able to discuss the problems with their students regarding their writing. And also the other type of conference is what we call group conference, okay, which means students read their partner's composition with comments about where they think the composition seems wrong, and then they give suggestion about how to improve their writing. And another type of feedback, which is the most common type of feedback that we have used. Okay, this is teacher feedback. So then we as teachers play different roles here, all right? So first, we can play the role of readers, okay, interacting with the student. So, we try to respond to the composition with positive feedback, like, okay, this is good point, or I agree with you, okay? And also we can draw students' attention to a specific point of confusion or to strategies for revision, like, choices of problem solving, giving them some options, or giving them some examples. Ask them, maybe to provide more example, in their revision. And here, as teachers, we can also provide reference to grammatical errors along with the reason for the unsuitability, of those errors. However, apart from the three types of feedback here, okay, we can ask students, to perform self-monitoring, which is another technique for providing feedback, which is, very useful in developing learners' autonomy. So that means students, can give some kind of feedback to their own writing. So through this technique, learners then can make notes in their drafts with questions and comments on their problems before submitting their papers, and then teachers can give feedback to them. So we can see that, feedback, delivery, and revision are a type of social interaction. It's a communication, between the teacher and the student, or, between students themselves. This is an actual communicative situation, which they can apply in the future in their work. And feedback can provide useful language information to the learner. That means, when we provide feedback, we don't just give corrections, but we can also give some explanation, help the student learn more about the language. And through the feedback, the student will have more opportunities to modify output. They have a chance to improve their writing. So without feedback, students will not be able to modify output. That means, they will not be able to improve their writing effectively enough. But of course, our feedback must be effective, because, not all students can successfully respond to feedback. And here, I mean all levels of students. This is from my research that I conducted many years ago. Okay, this is just, a very brief presentation of my findings. Okay, so I investigated how my students, even though, they were my MA students, sometimes, they were not able to respond to my feedback successfully or effectively enough. All right, so, if they were able to respond to my feedback effectively, they would just follow what I suggested they do. Okay, sometimes they just copied, what I showed them. Okay, sometimes they just, made some changes. But, there are several possible reasons, for the mismatches that occur from time to time. So that means, sometimes the teacher comments or the teacher feedback is not understandable. Okay, so, from my findings, my students did not understand what I said. And so the students, were not able to change the language or writing using the teacher comments. That means they did not have enough knowledge or information about how to change the language as we suggested they do. And sometimes, the students, might choose not to make a revision. So this is quite interesting to see that students do not follow our suggestion all the time. Okay, sometimes they don't just change anything. All right, so this is quite interesting to see. And, when we talk about theoretical orientations in second language writing research, okay, there are 4 orientations. The first one is cognitive. which primarily focused on beliefs, perception, knowledge, or mental processes related to the text writers produce. The second one is the social orientation, which primarily focuses on describing social context and practices, investigating their mediating influences on individuals or groups and the text they produce. The genre is also another orientation, which primarily focuses on the nature or influence of genre on individuals or groups of individuals and the text they produce. And the last kind of theoretical orientation in SWLW research is socio-cognitive, which mainly focuses on both social and cognitive aspects and how their interactions influence individuals or groups and the text they produce. Okay, so now I'm going to almost my last part, yes, okay. So I just want to share with you my tips, for teaching writing. So first, okay, we need to understand our student reason for writing. Why do we assign our student, to write something? So we have to think about the goals, okay, for our students' writing practice. And we should provide as many opportunities for students to write as possible, because, writing requires practice, okay? So, we should give our students, as many opportunities, for practice as possible. And we should also give them different kinds of writing exercises, okay, so that they can improve their writing more proficiently. And also make writing meaningful for the students, okay? So this is related to the goal of their writing, okay? So what they have to write in class should be related somehow, okay, to their real life, to their future work, okay? Or we should provide context, right, in our writing assignment for our students. Then we should make feedback helpful and meaningful, just as I mentioned, right? If our feedback is incomprehensible, right, it would be useless, for our student. Okay, so sometimes the feedback, like you see, unclear, or grammar needs work, or you just put something like rewrite the whole paragraph. So, such feedback is not helpful and meaningful at all. So that, we need to give details and we need to give explanations, okay, to what we need them to do. And then we need to clarify for ourselves and for our students how their writing will be evaluated. So to avoid subjectivity, we need to let our students know the scale or the criteria, okay, for assessing their writing. And of course, that means, we need to prepare rubrics, okay, clear rubrics, for our students, to follow in the first place. And we should invite young writers to write freely without worrying about correctness, because, young writers or novice writers tend to be concerned about, their mistake or errors. Okay, so we just try, okay, to encourage them to write more freely, okay, without being too much concerned about mistakes, particularly grammatical and mechanical mistakes. And we should also engage young writers in short bursts of writing, because, it's hard for them, to stay focused, for a long period of time, yes. And we should encourage writers to keep journals or diaries. This is a classical approach, okay, but I think, this is very important to help our students, write more freely, okay, and then they can also organize their ideas, in their writing. And we should also give writers the chance to revise, okay, so that, they can become independent writers, EFL writers, okay, who can perform self-revision and self-editing. And we should always let our students know that we are proud of their writing. Okay, we should say something nice about their writing. We should give them a note of encouragement, in addition to giving them corrections using red ink, right? Students are usually scared of seeing the red ink, right, in their writing assignment. So sometimes I use pencil or the blue ink, right, in my correction, in providing my feedback. And so, of course, when you show that you are proud of their writing, then the student, will feel more motivated, and they will just feel like writing more. And writing should not be only a tedious assignment. So writing should not be just be given as an assignment for marks or for exams. It's not just part of course evaluation, right? But writing, should help our student, to expand their experience so that they can learn, right, how to express themselves, more clearly, more effectively. But of course, how can they do that? All right, how can they write successfully? So for me, writing is rewriting. We just have to follow the stages, and we have to go back and forth during the stages of writing all the time. It's non-linear, and writing cannot be just taught, it must be learned. So students, learners, right, need to learn how to write, not just through grammar lessons or vocabulary lessons, but they need to learn how to write through reading, so they can expand their writing experience, of course, through reading experience. So this is what we're going to expand more, okay, in our next part of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Associate Professor Dr. Supong, for the wonderful talk. I guess it's the best time for us to start bridging the gap. So why don't we welcome back Dr. Willy Renandya.
Oh, sorry, I think I'm going to talk about the bridging the gap first.
Oh, sure.
Then
sure, go ahead.
Willy, will
follow.
All right.
All right.
Yes, good idea. So that there is continuity.
All right. Is that the right sequence, Ajahn Willy?
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I have a few points to share with you about reading writing connection. Okay. Before Ajahn Willy shares his points of discussion, and then he will conclude. Okay, then, of course, then there's some connection between reading and writing, okay? So first, okay, let me talk about the areas of reading and writing connection, okay? So there are three kinds of connection here, three areas of connection. The first one is meaning connection. The second one is language connection. The third one is instructional connection. So I won't go too long here, all right, for this section. So, meaning connection is like, when readers have to construct meaning, okay, by the use of knowledge about the language, okay, as Ajahn really mentioned, okay, about words, about sentences, all right? Writers as well, have to make meaning, okay, simply by word selection, okay, or the selection, of the structure of English, they use it in their writing. And then for the meaning connection, then there are three kinds of knowledge involved. The first one is information knowledge. Okay, so this involves, the topic knowledge or the grammatical background that the readers and writers, would have, okay, when they read or when they write. And structural knowledge, this refers to the organizational pattern. So that means, when we read, okay, we tend to be exposed to certain kind of organizational patterns, of that text. So when we write, okay, we also need to think about, what type of pattern, which organizational pattern, we would need to follow, okay, to produce a certain kind of text. And transactional knowledge, okay, this involves the means of communication. So, reading and writing can be a means of communication. Okay, so, when we write, then we have to keep our audience in mind. Okay, so that we know who our reader is and what our readers is expecting or anticipating or is going to react towards, our writing. Okay, so, as a reader, we also have to react somehow, okay, to the writing. So these three kinds of knowledge, would make the connection more possible in terms of meaning. And then language connection. So this is the language comprehension, like, vocabulary. So, when we read, okay, as Ajahn really mentioned, okay, we would need, a lot of or enough vocabulary, for understanding some reading text, okay? When we write, we also, need to have sufficient vocabulary, okay, to express ourselves in our writing. Instructional connection. Okay, so researchers say, teaching one skill necessarily involves teaching the other skill. So that means, when we teach reading, we should not just teach reading, but we should also teach writing. And when we teach writing, we should not just teach writing separately, but we should also include reading. So the three kinds of connection here, all right, are important, to our reading and writing courses. Just like at Thammasat, okay, when we teach academic English or ESP, all right, we have tried, to integrate both reading and writing components, in each course, so that it will not be only reading or it will not be only writing. And so what reading provides for writing, okay? So there are 4 points here. The first one is organization. So writers usually follow different styles of writing, right? According to the chunks of, the topic. For example, writing a story differs, from writing a problem-solving task, or the style of writing a comparison between two things or between two concepts is expected to be different from writing another kind of topic, like a technical topic or a topic related to cause and effect, okay? So reading is the same, right? So then readers then, need to pay attention, right, to different modes of writing as well, so that they understand, all right, the type of writing. So, when we read, okay, we look at the models of writing, okay? So that, when we write, we can follow certain models of writing. So reading, specifically for writing a composition, then can provide learners with content schema or the background knowledge about the topic they write about. Okay, so this knowledge, is essential for writers as well. Okay, so because, without schema, writers would have nothing to write about. So that's about the organization. So about the content, all right, regarding the content, so maybe learners of writing, are recommended to read as much as possible, because, reading, would help them, okay, gain, right, necessary information to write their essay, for example, okay? So reading then, would function as a stimulus for writing. So it's crucially important, for ESL writers, to enrich their knowledge through reading about their assigned topic. If they don't have enough information or knowledge about the topic, then they will not be able to promote the growth of their writing, okay? Next is vocabulary. So another aspect about reading for writing relates to the vocabulary use that reading provides for writers, right? So reading is one of the best strategies, for learning vocabulary, simply because words are presented in context. And so when vocabulary items are used, in writing, then, right, it's more likely that, they will stay longer, all right, when they are just already practiced. And, when students practice writing, okay, they can retain vocabulary in their long-term memory better than when they practice speaking. And the last part is motivation. So, so reading adds to EFL writers in terms of motivation as well, okay? So, for example, reading of literature, right, can function as a source of motivation for writing. Okay, so reading can encourage students to write in different ways, and writers can become aware of the topic, and then they can expand their schema about the topic, right? So they are likely, to be interested, and then, they would want, to devote more time, okay, to their writing. Okay, this is, my final part. So there are some cognitive strategies underlying the reading and writing connection. So, when you teach reading, when you teach writing, okay, you know, that student need to follow certain cognitive strategies, or, you know, we ourselves, you know, as readers and writers, okay, we need to employ some cognitive strategies, okay. So the first one is planning and goal setting, right? It's quite clear. You see that, you know, when we start reading, we need to plan and we need to set a purpose, you know, for our reading. When we write, we also need to plan, all right? And we need to set a goal for our writing. We have to determine many different things like, you know, audience or context, okay? And, you know, when we read, we also need to plan what we need to write first. We need to preview, okay, for example, okay, to see what the text is generally about, okay? And then, you know, we need to activate prior knowledge, the schema, okay? So as a reader, we need to tap our prior knowledge, you know, as we start reading, okay? So that, you know, as we go on reading then, all right, we can match our prior knowledge, you know, with the information we read, okay, in the text, so that, you know, we can understand the text better. And it's the same thing, you know, when we try to write, we need to also activate prior knowledge so that, you know, what we write, okay, we can express the information, we can express, you know, our feelings, for example, okay, in relation to our experience, in relation to our knowledge about a topic. And next, you know, we need to ask questions and make predictions. Okay, so as we read, we have to ask questions. We have to make predictions about what the text is coming about. So as we write, we also have to ask questions, you know, during the pre-writing stage. Okay, so that, you know, we can respond to the question and we can write, you know, more effectively. And we can also predict what the reader would expect, okay, to read, okay, from our writing. And then constructing the gist as we read any text, you know, so we need to try to locate the gist. We need to identify, right, the main point. So as we write, okay, during the early stage of writing, we also, you know, need to think about the gist or the main idea of what we're going to write. And as we go along, okay, in the reading or writing process, then we need to do the monitoring. We need to perform the monitoring, okay, which is a metacognitive process. It's like, you know, when we read, as we read and then we get stuck, maybe we don't understand something because of vocabulary words, or because of some structures, or because of the some information which is not familiar to us. So then what we should do as a reader, okay? And then this is, you know, what the writer will have to do as well, okay? When we or our students, you know, as writers, as they move along, okay, they need to monitor their writing as well, because of course, you know, they will get stuck. And so they have to go back and forth, all right, so that, you know, they can move on, you know, with their writing. And so this is a kind of self-regulation, okay? This is a self-regulated approach, you know, to learning that our student, you know, should also implement, okay, in their reading and writing practices. And the next one is revising meaning, reconstructing the draft. So the reader, okay, would, as he or she reads, okay, would try to revise the meaning. That means, you know, sometime, okay, when we read a text and we don't understand it, so we just need to try to reconstruct, you know, the text so that we understand what it means. Okay, maybe we have to go back and rethink, go back to earlier parts, all right, of the text, you know, to try to interpret the meaning of the text, you know, more clearly. As a writer, we also need to revise the meaning so that, you know, we can reconstruct our draft, you know, more effectively, so that, you know, we can revise, okay, what we put, you know, in the first draft, you know, more clearly in our revision. And reflecting and relating. So at this stage, okay, it comes to when we try to reflect, okay, on what we read. So it's like, you know, when we ask a question like, so what? Okay, when we read as a critical reader, okay, so we tend to ask questions like, you know, so what, or what does it mean to me? Okay, so from the reader's perspective, okay, the reader, you know, would need to reflect and then try to, before evaluating, you know, which is the last stage, okay, So the reader, would try to relate maybe what he or she reads, from the text, with his or her own experience. And this is, what the writer would need to do as well. As he writes, he has to reflect and relate this, to the reader's experience. And the last strategy would be evaluating. Okay, so now, right, this is something to do with critical reading and critical writing. So as a critical reader, okay, we or our student, should be able to evaluate, okay, the piece of writing, okay, so that, we can say what is right, what is wrong, okay, do we agree or disagree, okay, with the writer, okay, and as a writer, we also need to evaluate our writing, okay, so that, we can make sure that, what we are writing would be effective enough, would be acceptable, okay, to the reader. Okay, even though, usually the writer, would need to welcome agreement or disagreement, from the reader. Okay, so, these are the cognitive strategies that underlie the reading and writing connection. So, what I have shared with you here, all right, concern some connection, okay, between reading and writing skills. And so now, Ajahn Willy, will share with you, right, more information about this. Ajahn Willy, please.
Yes. That was a very, very insightful sharing and presentation on the nature of reading, and also on the possible connections between reading and writing. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the connection can happen at many, many different levels, at the cognitive level, and also at the thinking level, at the linguistic level, and also at the metacognitive level as well. Let me now try to speculate a bit more. Ajahn Supong and I have been looking at the literature, trying to find one big study that actually examined the connection between reading and writing. We have to say that we have not found anything that is of practical relevance to people like us, language teachers in the classroom, who are always interested to see the link, the very clear link between reading and writing. But one thing that we know is this, that reading a lot, reading in quantity, usually results in improvement in students' ability to write their papers or to write an essay. Let me very briefly, it's going to take about 5 minutes. And after this, I want to have a lot more conversation with you, a lot more discussions about, reading and writing, about the connection between the two. Okay, reading and writing connection. Just a very brief summary, about the connection between reading and writing. I think we have the same point. I think we know that, and we agree that the connection is really, really there. They're closely related. If you can't read, for example, you won't be able to write. That connection is obvious. And another possible connection, another well-established connection, is that good readers, let me say that again, good readers, these are readers who have read a great deal, are likely to be or tend to be good writers as well. But you will also have noticed that some of your students may be great readers, but their writing is still spotty. Their writing is, contains a lot of mistakes as well. So that's what I want to explore a bit later. But generally, good readers are good writers. Next. Yes, they're connected, but they're different. If you are linguistically proficient, then you may be able to decipher the Thai words there, which essentially means that reading is not exactly the same as writing. They're similar. They, at many different levels, we can relate to the connection between the two, but they are not the same. One, for example, is a receptive skill, as was mentioned early on, and the other one is a productive skills. From years of experience as a language teacher, I think you and me, Know that receptive knowledge of reading and listening does not automatically translate to productive knowledge of speaking or writing. Why is that? Okay, let us look at the mental processes briefly about reading and writing. Reading being a receptive skill and writing being a productive skill. In reading, usually these three major processes, these three major cognitive processes are at play. You need to first be able to perceive the words and the sentences on the text. Number two, you need some grammatical. Sorry, there's a loud noise there outside. Okay, parsing essentially means that you need some language knowledge, some grammatical knowledge, so that you are able to put these words together into meaningful units. Sorry. And the first two basically are what I have referred to as the linguistic process of reading. Utilization is the thinking bit. You need to make use of what you know in order to make sense of what is in the text. It's called utilization. This is what the cognitive processes of reading involve. What about writing? Writing is a bit different. The starting point is conceptualization. The starting point is you need to have some ideas. You need to have some concepts, some things that you want to say, some message that you want to communicate to other people. The next step is what has been called formulation. Now, this is a process that involves turning concepts, ideas into some linguistic form in your head. Let me say that again. Now, this is a process that happens in our head when you try to translate ideas into linguistic forms, into words and into something that is grammatically acceptable. And the last bit is the articulation, the actual writing that you put on paper or on your computer screen. So the processes are not the same. One is receptive, the other one is productive. Okay, so essentially it comes down to this. Now this is a very accurate observation by these two researchers, Fitzgerald and Shanahan. They're saying this: if reading and writing really were identical, they're not, and not just similar, then everything learned in one would automatically transfer to the other. And that doesn't always happen, as we have seen many, many times in our own class. Students have read a great deal, but then the ability to transfer what they have learned from their reading does not always happen when they try to express themselves in speaking or in writing. My proposal, I'm going to present a proposal here. It's still, very much speculation at this stage, but I think it makes sense from a second language learning perspective. Now, here's what I have in mind. What can we do to bridge the gap between reading and writing? I think we need to have a good understanding of at least 5 elements here. Let me give you 1 or 2 minutes to look at this. We need a theory of language. We need a theory of learning. Now, these two are probably the most important things. They're not difficult to understand, as you will see a bit later. And number 3, what teachers can do based on their understanding of the theory of language and the theory of learning. And then number 4, what can students do to take advantage of these two theories about language and language learning. And finally, there's some prerequisite, which I will call the threshold level of proficiency. I'm going to explain this very, very briefly and very quickly. The first thing is this. I think you need a theory of language. And that theory of language is often referred to as the genre theory. This has a lot of application in language learning, in reading, as well as in writing. The genre theory essentially says that a text is created not in a vacuum. A text is created because somebody has a purpose. So the starting point is a purpose. he or she wants to say something. And that purpose is communicated to an audience. So the first one is purpose, the other one is audience. You need an audience in order to communicate ideas. Otherwise, you will be talking to yourself, you will be writing to yourself. So the audience is important. The next one is the context. When you write, it always happens in a certain context, whether the context is just to exchange very simple ideas in writing through email messages, or whether the context is writing an academic piece of paper, for example. And the last thing to notice is that the theory of language requires that we understand the culture. Otherwise, our writing will be considered as socially and culturally inappropriate. So that theory becomes very, very important when later we look at the connection between reading and writing. Yeah. So PACC: purpose, audience, context, and culture. Now, all these four components determine the language features, the grammar, the vocabulary, the text structure that you need to use in your writing, essentially. Okay, we also need a theory of learning. When you hear the word theory, it may sound very scary, but here I just want to focus on one specific, one small theory of language learning known as the noticing hypothesis. The noticing hypothesis simply says that if you don't pay attention, if you don't notice things that you see in a text, that information is lost. That information will not stay in your head. So seeing things in a text, reading, listening is just input. You need to take it one step further. You need to pay attention to the way the information is presented in the input, the language features, the grammar, the vocabulary, the expressions that are used to express the ideas. You need to pay attention to that. Otherwise, you will not be able to remember those features. And later, when you start writing, you may be struggling because you don't remember the words, the phrases that you saw earlier on in your reading. I hope I'm making sense here. The first one, you need a theory of language. The second one, you need the theory of learning. Now, let me try to relate the theory of learning to the theory of language. So when your students read something, let's say an academic paper, then what you need to do is to highlight to the students, hey students, please pay attention to the way the abstract is written. Pay attention to the structure of the abstract, for example. Pay attention to the starting sentence of the abstract. What language features are used there? What words are used and for what purpose that particular words or sentences are used? So this is what I mean by noticing and paying attention to language features. Yeah, I hope you can see that connection there. Next, what about the role of the teacher? Again, the role of the teacher is to use a teaching approach that promotes noticing. So when you teach a piece of narrative, for example, to your students, then you may want to highlight the particular structure, the particular words, the particular phrases and grammatical features that are used in a narrative. For example, the use of pronouns in a narrative, the use of the past tenses in a narrative. So you want to highlight those in your teaching. Of course, you don't want to cover, to include all the language features, because then noticing becomes impossible. You need to choose, you need to pick out ones that you feel are the most relevant and the most important, and then you focus on those so that the students can pay attention to that particular features. Number two, I think this has been mentioned before by Ajahn Supong, frequent and focused and clear feedback. If you have been working with your students on argumentative piece of writing, then your feedback will have to be focused. Your feedback will have to highlight important features of a piece of argumentative writing and nothing else, just that. What about students? This one is interesting. What do students need to do? Early on, we saw the connection between reading and writing. If students read a lot, chances are they'll be able to become better writers. But that doesn't always happen, as we have seen from our own experiences. One thing you can do for your students to pay attention when they read is for them to read like a writer. What it means simply is this: the students should not just be reading in order to comprehend, to understand what the text is about, but they also to do this. They have to pause and think as they read, you know, a piece of text. They have to read and pay attention to certain language features so that later when they write, they will remember. Okay, now I'm writing my introduction of my term paper. Now, early on when I read a similar journal article, I noticed that the authors use certain expressions, certain words, the way the authors, you know, did the citation. You know, these are things that I paid attention early on. So when I start writing, I should be able to remember some of the things that I specifically paid attention to. So that is one big connection that I want to draw between reading and writing. Read like a writer. Number two, when the students write, now this is very important, they should also be writing like a reader. Now this is interesting. Writing like a reader means that when you write, you're not writing for yourself. You're writing for an audience. And because of that, after you finish writing your first draft, you have to put it aside for a while, and you have to look at it again and read your own writing from a reader's perspective. Are things clear there? Is there anything that is missing? Is there anything that is not clear? Is there anything that I assume too much that the readers know, but actually they don't know? So two things here to remember: read like a writer and write like a reader. Is this easy to do? No, it's not easy. But with practice, I think eventually students and we will be able to do it like this. Finally, an important point to remember: as a language teacher, I am always reminded of this. There is this threshold. A language threshold is a certain level of proficiency that the students need to achieve in order for them to be able to write fluently, accurately, and coherently. At the early stage of learning, at the basic elementary level, yes, students can write something, but I don't think we can expect them to write, a solid piece of writing, for example. An academic piece of writing, for example, is not possible. I think students will need to reach a level, a threshold of at least intermediate level before they can write, for example, in an ESP context or EAP context. Then the students will be more ready to read like a writer and also to write like a reader. So essentially, I'm suggesting that for serious type of writing, usually an academic piece of writing, students ideally should be in the B1 or B2 range. B1 at least, but ideally B2. This is like IELTS 6, around there. Then they can write, you know, coherently and accurately and in a very interesting manner using all the language resources that they have acquired. Again, let me highlight this: the best way for us to help our students acquire a threshold level of language is through extensive reading. That is the best way of reaching that level of proficiency. And once the students are there, then I think they will be in a better position to see the link between reading and writing more clearly. There you go. The reading and writing connection. I've written a small article. It's called Bridging the Reading Writing Gap. And this beautiful ebook is available in my website. It's called Willy's ELT Corner. Feel free to download and read and respond to it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's what we have in terms of sharing what we know about the possible connection between reading and writing. For those of you who are looking for a research topic, I think this is very exciting. Exciting because a lot of research has been done in this area, but yet people are still not very sure, not very clear about the pedagogical link, about the link, the connection between reading and writing. To what extent reading translates into writing ability. Joy, back to you. I'm happy now to respond to questions from the audience.